maybe hand over to you now, Sarah, and I'll hang about as well. Are we pretty much on time anyway?
Great.
Okay.
Thanks very much. So, I'm afraid as built, not quite as built. I told the stories yesterday, really. So, apart from one small story, there were fewer stories than yesterday. And really all I wanted to do with this slot was to raise some questions about the demands all of this fabulous learning analytics infrastructure places on an institution's digital capability, really at all levels, particularly, I think, staff and student data literacy, which you saw in Helen's talk is one of the key things that we're hearing much more about now among those kind of digital information skills. But also at a senior level, how much do senior managers need to understand about this whole picture to know whether they want it or not? And I think it's further made more interesting, if you like, by Biz and Hefty's push on learning gain, which is a kind of a related, coming up with a load of data and coming out with a number that you may or may not trust, I suppose. So, as always, you can have all the data you want, but you still have to distrust it and use your own intelligence and judgment. And I want to be absolutely clear that none of our work in analytics is saying anything other than that. It's all in the code of practice covers this, that you do have to that. But how can you be sure that you're doing it, really? So do staff and students have the skills they need to appropriately use this data? And I think moving a step backwards, data literacy more generally, I think is an issue that is rising in importance. When I was doing the consultation round for our co-design work that I was talking about yesterday around digital capability, I had a few people coming up to me very urgently in corridors and saying, data literacy, it's all about data literacy. But then on the flip side, when I mailed out to mailing lists about this, put it on Twitter, has anyone got stories of how you either show me that this is a big issue in your institution or show me how you're tackling it. I got literally one response from the lovely Jo Nichols over there. Everything else was just deathly silence. And whether that's, I don't know, or I don't care, or I'm not looking at your mailing list and tweets anyway, I'm not sure. And, Jo and I agreed really that it's like Helen was saying about the data literacy sits there in the kind of critical consumer part. That's the key thing. You have to be able to consume data visualization, stories that are told with data critically. And so it's one of those things that the code of practice makes very clear. There's stuff about data validity, that somewhere in your institution there needs to be some very, very gemmed up people who really, really understand what these algorithms are doing and can ensure that they are valid and can improve them year on year and this kind of thing. But generally there needs to be a much more highly diffused understanding of the kind of things the algorithm are doing, the kind of things the data may be telling you and not telling you. And that also needs to, because we're talking about a student dashboard, that also does need to extend to students. I mean, maybe I'm overly sceptical about the sort of visualizations of data that pushed to us all the time. But I think you always need to ask questions about what is this actually saying to me? And some of the questions, some of the answers people say, it's all around your dashboard. If your dashboard is really well designed, then this is taken care of. You don't actually need to know much about the data. And my answer to this is this. Now, this is a story that reveals me to be a complete idiot, but I cannot, I'm not a shower native. It's a bit like the notion of digital natives, which reared its head briefly yesterday. I grew up in a house without a shower. Maybe that's why. Seriously, no idea. Look, I'm sure this is a grower shower as well from the hotel over there. Posh shower, costs a lot of money. I'm sure those people spend a lot of time on their user interface. No sense. I managed to turn both of those dials in the wrong direction. They got freezing water out of the wrong hole. So my lack of ability with shower dials goes back to my first ever working away. I went down to that conference, could literally so not get the shower to work, I had to go down to reception in my towel and say, please come and make my shower work for me. And my point is that the people designing this thought that they had made it idiot-proof, but they hadn't met me. And the same is true of your dashboard. That for everyone that makes sense to, there's going to be one person out there somewhere who is telling themselves the wrong story with the data you're presenting. And again, this is referred to in the Code of Practice, that you need to be so careful, particularly, I think, for the data that is projected to students, or the data that they get to see and is acted on in a way that they actually see happening, that they are taking that and telling themselves a different story, a story that you don't want, a story that is going to lead them to actually feel worse about their studies, or to engage in fewer ways, or to hide more. And obviously nobody wants that to happen, but you need to be extra super careful. And how would you do that? And another concern I've heard raised by, in this case it was the Pro-Vice Chancellor, and she was looking at what their staff would understand from swipe entry card data. And she was saying that she thinks some of the faculties, the staff, really wouldn't have the kind of data literacies to get very far with that data. And depending on the numerateness or non-numerateness of the discipline background of people, that can be a real wide variation. This comes back to is it a new, I would suggest that an element of data literacy is actually necessary for digital citizenship, actually, given the amount of data that gets pushed at us and us to make decisions about all the time. I think certainly for everyone across the university. So my question, this question kind of for me, for just the work that we're doing around digital capability, is where does data literacy have to sit in all of this? I've already mentioned in the leadership development day, we've definitely got learning analytics down as one of the topics, but senior leaders, they may not, and as Neil was saying, that there is obviously a readiness exercise to go through here for institutions about whether they have their data in the right places, whether they know what they're doing with that aspect of things. But leaders need to understand what kind of implications this would have for their institution or whether they want to do it. We've seen already that these elements of digital literacy, is data literacy specifically there in that kind of underpinning framework as something that needs to be thought about. But it also needs to be thought about, as somebody was saying, to do with bringing HR in. So do your HR structures allow you to appropriately recognise that some of those data skills, often some of the skills that have emerged more recently aren't well recognised, are things like grading structures, and what can we do to help that? Online courses that potentially, and we're not necessarily going to go and create a lot of online courses, but we'll probably do something around pulling things together and perhaps creating a buzz about certain aspects. And is data literacy one of the things that we should be focusing on there? And do we bring it into our diagnostic tools? How much time have we got? Great, in that case, do you want to talk to the people around you? And I'd like to get a reflection back. Actually, take 2 minutes then, and then we'll be safe. So, do you recognise this as an issue? Is it something your institution is doing anything about? Is there anything you'd like me to do about it as DISC? Okay, so 2 minutes just to whoever you find around you, and then I'll take the feedback with the mic. Yeah. Yeah. So, did anyone want to feedback? Clearly not. Hello, people. Have we got a mic anywhere? Mic on the front row, we say that?
Yeah, mic too.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, would anyone like to? We'll just shout out some feedback if we haven't towards the mic. But okay, there is a roving mic. Oh, Joe, and then Fiona.
what we were saying here is that we don't want data-driven approaches, we want question-driven approaches. And that's what we need to help people do, is identify good questions and share their questions.
Yeah, we were discussing that last night briefly. Yeah, the difference in that is the kind of experimental design approach, and whereas the big data approach is a bit more data-driven. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't know what questions to ask until you've got a whole load of data. I agree. Your approach is the nice starting point, but
like that, and you're looking for something that will then interest you. I think that's a very different approach on an organisation level, strategic level, as actually thinking about a good question to answer.
Yeah, I think your approach is generally the way to go, but just the whole movement of big data is about just amassing huge things, running some processes through it and see what comes up. But that may not be appropriate in an educational context to the same extent.
Fiona, did you want to? Oh, okay. Does anyone else want to feed anything in? Steve.
Thank you. Just to say, I suppose, following on from that, the questions you want to ask are going to be very different in different parts of the organisation. And I think many of us might be perhaps quite comfortable with the questions that, say, a supportive personal tutor might want to ask, and perhaps be trusting in the way they would interpret the data. And there's a lovely comment on here from on Twitter from Brian Owen about, we use Turnitin in probably all our institutions pretty much, and we talk about there about interpreting the data, but actually we always get asked what's the pass mark, what's the fail mark, for plagiarism. A lot of people in the institution, the visa compliance officer, the attendance monitoring officer, the quality enhancement, whatever, may have very different questions, and we may be much less comfortable with the way they want to interpret the data.
I think that's right, and I think that's what I'm sensing as you move out of what we would call like learning analytics, where really the focus of the focus that's come up very strongly from the GIST work is positive interventions to support student success, higher student attainment. When we start to move towards learning gain, which has been a lot of focus on kind of politically, the focus shifts to being about teaching quality and about a quality experience and how can you judge that. And I think that's potentially interesting, let's say, for institutions, less so for individuals, actually individual students. Helen.
I think maybe for teaching staff, the question about capability is a bit similar to the one about the flipped classroom, where if you've got students doing all this preparation beforehand, you have to be able to teach very responsively when they come into the classroom. And I think that's the key capability is around responsive teaching and responsive curriculum design, isn't it? So if we want students to have a better learning experience, it's got to be because we're actually doing something in response to this data. So yes, understanding what the data means, but also then being able to respond. If the structures and the skills are too rigid, then we can't respond anyway. And so then students who rightly worry that this will be seen as a substitute for good teaching and good curriculum design, we won't have a response to them. So I think if we don't have those flexibilities to respond and agile kind of teaching approaches and curriculum design approaches, it will be harder to make the case that this will lead to a better teaching experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're done, and we must be done on time too. Yeah. As Neil said, we have I've already vandalised mine, but the code of practice is on the UCISA desk just at the front there by the coffee area.